Good afternoon. I'm David Phillips. Thanks for taking the time to hear my story and learn about Brand 316. My father, Dr. Keith Phillips, founded World Impact over 50 years ago. I grew up in World Impact, attending the schools, the Bible clubs, and the camps. I even worked there every summer throughout high school. My heart and love for those in need has been instilled in me since I was a child. Christianity was a part of my life since I was a start. I graduated Azusa Pacific University and with a degree in business, and then I worked for a large car manufacturer in their executive training program. I then started a digital marketing firm, which employed close to 50 people and worked with hundreds of clients worldwide. I hired people if I believed they would do well, not solely based on their previous experience or their level of education. I looked at the whole person and gave anyone that wanted a chance to succeed. Several people are thriving today because I gave them a chance when nobody else would. Caring about the person as a whole was important to me. Business was great. I had 2 amazing sons, an incredible wife, and by every measure from a worldly perspective, I was doing phenomenal. I have challenged God my entire life. If there was a more difficult path to take, I would take it. God has a long history of giving me second, third, fourth, fifth chances, as He does for all of us. We serve a God of second chances. Looking back at the warning shots which He fired, I was clearly just stubborn and refused to hear or acknowledge them. He gave me plenty. In January 2015, I had a stroke and a grand mal seizure. The emergency room doctor told my wife, the emergency doctor told my wife that I was not going to make it. He told her to say her goodbyes. They then put me in an induced coma because of brain swelling. The doctors told my wife and family that I would likely not be able to function or speak. Miraculously, I left the hospital 10 days later able to speak, remembering everything from the past. I left with a broken shoulder and a new diagnosis of end-stage kidney disease. Things could have been so much worse, but we serve a God of second chances. That should have been my final warning shot. I should have heard it. I should have listened. I knew in my heart it was time to start paying attention to what I knew was right. It was time to develop a real relationship with Christ. My health continued to decline, and my unwillingness to submit to Christ continued. In June 2016, after several unsuccessful surgeries, and with my kidney function below 5%, I had to start dialysis immediately or die. In January 2017, while at dialysis, I had a strong calling, very strong calling, to get immediately right with God. I was dependent, literally, on a machine to survive and to keep me alive. And I was being told by the Spirit that I needed to submit to God or else. I remember the exact moment. It really was clear, it was concise, it was direct, it was from Him. I downloaded some gospel music. I told myself I was going to start going to church immediately. That should have been my final warning shot. I should have not have ignored it. Hebrews 12:25 warns us to not refuse Him who is speaking. I should not have refused Him. Thankfully, we serve a God of second chances. On April 25th, 2017, I was arrested by several federal agents for the use of interstate commerce to commit murder for hire. At that moment, I made the mistake of thinking that innocence or guilt mattered. But the resources already invested in arresting me, there was only one conclusion. No matter what the facts were, career-focused agents and prosecutors have the power to paint any picture that they want and have unlimited government resources to ensure a victory. This included withholding evidence. This included witnesses blatantly lying to the road. This included me not being able to testify, not being able to receive bail. There is a reason the government has a 99.6% win rate. I refused to take a plea deal, which offered a significant time reduction, because it would require me to admit to something I did not do. I went to trial, and I was found guilty. I was shocked, to say the least. Even the U.S. Marshals guarding me that were at the trial the entire time, they were stunned as well. They thought I was going home that day. I was sentenced to 90 months in federal prison. The level of corruption and dishonesty and complete disregard for the law still shocks me to this day. Do you believe that a 37-year-old white man with a good legal team, with no criminal convictions, could get a fair trial? 6 years ago, my answer was a resounding yes. I now know that is not the case. Now, what if that person is not white? What if that person cannot afford a legal team? What if that person has a prior criminal record? Do you actually believe they have any chance at all in our criminal justice system? I grew up Christian. I believed it was the truth, but never truly had a personal relationship with Christ. Prison changed that for me. Throughout the Bible, God uses the situations you are in to speak with you through His Word, to train you for your future, to equip you with the tools and knowledge you need to be successful and serve Him. I was in the most dangerous spot I could be in. I was caged up with no freedom, but for some reason, I had a strong trust that everything was going to be okay. And also, that something good was going to come from this. God has a way of using the devil to push you closer to Him, to submit yourself to Him. The Bible was my go-to reading, followed by prayer, followed by calling and writing my wife and my family, followed by learning every single thing I could about the law and helping others. The biblical messages I heard my entire life from great Christian leaders, some here today, started making complete and total sense. My passion became trusting in God and relying on Him. I started to think less about my future business opportunities and more about what I could do to serve His kingdom. In the worst of situations, God was there. I could feel His presence. My obsession became Christ. Being arrested was the last warning shot from God I would ever need. I witnessed more violence than anyone should ever have to see in a lifetime. 9 different times I saw somebody die. Violence, drugs, corruption, alcohol, they're all a part of daily life in prison. I was in a unique situation as well. I was educated, which is uncommon. I was successful on the outside with a legitimate business. I had a respectable crime through a prisoner's eyes. I went to trial. I was not a rat. I would stand up for myself. My paperwork all checked out. And I had a wife who literally visited me every single weekend.
Amen.
I also was extremely ill with dialysis because of the lack of proper medical care within the prison system. Dialysis is a difficult disease in any situation. Your body is literally dependent on a machine to survive. This included several emergency room visits and stays at the hospital. At one point, the prison refused to treat my pneumonia. And then after a few days, it caused me to go to the emergency room and my left lung partially collapsed. I left the hospital 2 weeks later, 2 surgeries later, 20 pounds lighter. But God protected me.
Amen.
The appeals court found that there was error in my trial.
All right.
But it said it was quote-unquote harmless. My attention then focused on learning every single thing I could about compassionate release. While doing so, other inmates asked if I would be willing to help them out and if I could help them out with their cases. As we all know, prison is all about race. Race determines which cell you have. Race determines who you hang out with. Race determines what TV you watch. Race determines where you hang out in the yard. In prison, the system encourages racial divide from the second you enter, because 10 separate groups are much easier to control than one unified group. It feels like Satan does the same exact thing to the body of Christ by creating divides that over time begin to feel normal. Those divides in the church make the body of Christ weaker, and the longer the divides last, the harder it is to heal. Our unifying factor is and always should be Jesus Christ. The Bible makes it clear in Ephesians 4:26 through 27. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. The white shot caller in my unit, who I got along with, is a well-known Irish mobster serving life for 4 murders that they quote-unquote knew about. The first day I arrived, he gave me advice on how to make the proper shank, including the importance of dipping it in feces. So when you stab the person, they don't just get stabbed, but they get an infection. The inmates knew I was going to be transferred there well before I came, days before I arrived. They knew everything about me. They knew I was coming before my lawyers knew, before my family knew. Corruption in prison is very real. One day, he pulled me aside and told me I cannot do legal paperwork for another race because it creates a false hope, and that in 20 plus years he's been down in prison, he has never seen a jailhouse lawyer get somebody out. This is the same guy that told me very seriously once that he wanted to kill somebody because his laugh annoyed him. Basically, if I did legal work for another race, and it's something went wrong, it could lead to a beef, leading to fights, stabbings, etc. I told him no. We agreed that if something negative came out of it, that I was on my own. A few months later, I got my first inmate released. When he found out, he pulled me into a cell and he said, "Good job," and to keep it up. And then we, with the emphasis on we, should start charging. Everything in prison is a hustle. And all of a sudden, a huge liability became a huge asset. Of course, I did not charge. I was able to get 6 other inmates out while working on my case. Only one was white. The judge ordered my immediate release on December 23rd, 2020. I was released 5 days later, so not exactly immediate. I received a kidney transplant 6 months later. There were numerous profound moments in prison. I know that I would never have had the relationship I have with Christ that I have now if I did not spend close to 4 years in prison. Focused on Him, reading His Word, placing my life literally in His hands. He gave me several chances before prison, several, and I literally ignored them. I ignored every single warning shot. He is a God of second chances. There were several times that God answered my prayers, some more quickly than others. One time that sticks out to me because it was just so blatant. It was a few minutes before lockdown, and I was feeling hopeless for whatever reason. I walked down to quickly check my email, and I asked, while I was feeling hopeless, I just prayed and said, "God, give me some good news," literally anything. I walked down to quickly check my email right before we were locked in, and I got an email from my brother, who emails from him were rare because he is extremely busy. The subject line of his email was, quote unquote, "some good news," which it was. It was much more than he knew. Romans 8:28 was my motivation. I knew that God would use this experience for His glory. The amount of hopelessness in prison is astounding, and is supported by every single statistic that you can find in reference to incarceration. The hope for succeeding post-release is absent for majority of those inside. Incarceration does create poverty. Incarceration does create hopelessness. Incarceration does divide families. The hope of getting out of prison has to change to the hope of staying out of prison. Meeting the immediate needs of the recently released is important, but it is vital to focus on their long-term growth. It's critical that they can envision a successful future and have a realistic path to achieve those goals. Brand 316 was started with that in mind.